Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are right now. Bernardine and I are really pleased to spend the next 20 or 30 minutes with you discussing what we see as the future for trade post 2021 and beyond. Bernardine Adkins is the partner from our EU Trade and Competition team. I'm Ursula Johnston, the director in the EU Trade and Competition team focusing on trade. So good afternoon, Bernardine. It is lovely to see you sitting in sunny Warwick, and I'm down in sunny London.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you're rubbing it in there, Ursula, because I understand it is sunny London, but it's very, very rainy Warwick at the moment. So I don't know what I'm going to do about my exercise later on today. But there you go. But I'm so pleased you introduced this as not being about Brexit, because it's not that we are frightened of the word anymore, but it is that we have left. And really the question is, what are the trading relations going to be between the UK and the EU post December of this year? And also from that flows, what are the relationships going to be with other countries as well? And so we really want to focus on that. And so let's just remind ourselves, go back, and it seems a world ago, eons ago, pre-COVID-19, as to where we were, is that negotiations, we had left the EU. And as you know, we'd created this fiction under the withdrawal agreement, a fiction of everybody saying, let's pretend that the UK still is in the EU, which is why the UK is still entitled to take full part in all the COVID planning that is currently going on and the procurement that is currently going on at an EU level. We are, by virtue of a fiction agreement, we are still fully fledged members of the EU, although we can't take part in the institutional aspects, such as we don't have MEP sitting anymore in the Parliament, we no longer have a seat at the Council of Ministers, but we are still required to comply with community law. And so where were we? Negotiations had begun, and in February the UK had, at long last, published its guidelines in a 30-page document, its guidelines on the future negotiations, future trading role, which I think we were all very pleased to see, because to date the UK had very much said, oh, it's a secret, we don't want to compromise our negotiating position. And I think they've learned the lesson that the EU learned some years ago, is that it's imperative that anyone negotiating these huge free trade agreements is open, transparent, whereby business can make representations to the UK, or slash at the time it was the EU, as to what is the appropriate stance to be taking on certain things. So that was a great thing, 30 pages worth, and not that size necessarily matters. And the EU published its negotiating position, which was some 45 pages worth. And then they had the early head-to-head, face-to-face meetings, teasing out the areas of impasse. And really there I just want to limit myself to saying, obviously the totemic area which gets a lot of heat is around fisheries, and we need to bear in mind that only represents 0.1% of our GDP, but it's an emotive issue. As I said, it's totemic of us leaving, and that is going to be, it would seem, a complete sticking point, notwithstanding very little GDP that is at stake. And the other potential sticking point that in my view, once reading through the EU documents, actually I don't think that's necessarily so. It was always about the level playing field. And it's been spun in the press as saying, oh my goodness, this is terrible. The EU wants to trap us into the UK, into its regulatory system. And that isn't at all what the EU is asking for. They are asking for a so-called level playing field in certain areas, be it environment, social protection, employment, social protection, and also competition and state aid, importantly state aid. And essentially, whereas some people are saying, oh, the EU wants to trap the British into this dynamic alignment, in other words, the British must sign up to the current standards as to where we are, and as the EU improves these standards and makes them stronger, that the UK should align in keeping with the EU. Well, the EU isn't asking for that. If one actually looks at the detail of this text, it says it should be used as a reference point. It basically says to the UK, we would like you to freeze the clock on those at the time you leave, but we all commit to common high standards, which quite frankly is what one expects in any sophisticated modern free trade agreement, is that you don't want the parties don't wish the other one to basically be gouging their costs and getting an unfair competitive advantage. So this is something that we expect to see played out time and time again with respect to any free trade agreements between developed countries, or even not so developed countries. And we've seen it recently in the Mexico, Canada, US agreement, where that Mexico had to agree to pay its car workers a certain minimal level. Otherwise, that was an unfair undercutting. So I can't help but feeling that it was always achievable, provided people were prepared to nuance the language, step down from some of the spinning of how things were, and compromise where it was necessary. It was always doable, but it was clear that the timing was really going to be tight. And Michel Barnier, in those halcyon pre-COVID days back in early March, even before COVID-19 was on the landscape, said the EU, they may need more time. But given that it's been over 2 weeks now, they've not had face-to-face meetings. Much of the Commission, like us, Brussels is under lockdown, is working from home, apart from state aid, some very, very sensitive areas such as state aid. They're all working from home. Both Michel Barnier and Boris Johnson are also under self-isolation as well. But the difference is between the EU and the UK here is, whereas the beauty of having 27, 28 member states is you can delegate, this is about the coming together of resources. It means that the EU have a dedicated team, a whole team. This is all they're doing. And reporting into Michel Barnier is reporting into Ursula von der Leyen from time to time. Whereas the head guys, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Rishi Sunak, they're running, an epidemic and pandemic in the UK. So they are simply not, even if the super people, they are simply not going to be on top of the detail in the way that Michel Barnier is going to be able to do to direct the negotiations. So that is going to be problematic for the UK. They're at a distinct handicap there, notwithstanding the excellent nature of the civil service that we have.
So Bernardine, over the last couple of weeks, I've had an increasing number of queries about whether the UK and the EU will agree to extend the transitional period beyond the 31st of December this year in light of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's would appear to be the sensible, pragmatic thing to do. And if the government is going to request an extension of 1 to 2 years, it has to be agreed by the EU by the end of June. It needs to be done by the 1st of July. And as you said, there's a serious amount of pressure from business and politically on the government to do that. But so far, the government is stonewalling, and the description is that this is enshrined in law. Not that that matters, because they can change the law. But so far, the government is very much stonewalling and saying, no, we are left, but we are not going to ask for an extension as of end of June, and we're not going to get an extension for a free trade agreement as of 31st of December. That being the case, I think it's practically nigh impossible, quite frankly, unless we roll on everything, which we're unlikely to do, roll on everything for the free trade agreement, or maybe have an absolutely skeletal agreement, with an awful lot of, as I say in French, à suivre, to come. Some sort of pragmatic workaround, but clearly, at the moment, politically, the government absolutely does not want to be seen to be blinking. And so I think there for business, notwithstanding what pressure one may wish to put on the government, business really needs to start preparing and thinking about what sort of preparations it needs to take to be ready for 31st of December, because we're getting no signals from the government that is going to change, notwithstanding the very, very real challenges that the country and the economy is currently having. And today, in fact, it was the FT that said, it referenced banging our head against a brick wall, not to extend the transitional period. But notwithstanding that is, I'm afraid, is a situation we're currently seeing. And I think in that context, Ursula, it's over to you. What are the principal points that we need to be telling people to do to ensure, notwithstanding everyone's working out their back bedrooms, what should we be doing?
I think as well, Bernardine, when we talk about extending the transitional period, thinking about how much time do we need to extend by, because there's an awful lot of difference in today's current climate between 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months, or even 24 months. So I think one of the questions that government will need to be asking itself, what is a realistic chunk of time that people will need to get prepared for trading on different terms with the EU? And I would suspect that if we, as being predicted, we don't get back to business until as usual for another 6 months from now, which takes us through to August, September, then I think businesses realistically need at least an additional 6 months to regroup, prepare, and get their house in order for what will come from when the UK leaves the European Union formally.
Yeah, but let's assume that we go down the road, continue to go down the road. The government politically says it's unconscionable. This is what we've promised. This is what we're going to do. And if heaven forbid the economy is still flat, and I'll think, well, okay, we're all feeling pain. Let's just feel a bit more. How much worse can it get? And then it would be a question people won't necessarily be blaming the government for, or it might also be COVID-19. That being the case, what could people realistically do, given that so many of us are remote working?
Yeah, well, putting aside conversations on preparing logistics, procurement, supply chains, what I've done over the last couple of weeks is really think about, if I was a legal team, I perhaps have some additional resource, some additional time right now, and I've got my team working remotely from home. What are 5 things that we could start to tackle in the coming weeks in preparation for Brexit or 2021 or 2022, whenever that may be? So I've put together a 5-point plan, which I'm just going to talk you through now, and feel free obviously to chime in with questions. I think the first thing to do is to have a look at your agreements with your service providers around cross-border trade. So that could be freight, logistics, customs brokers. What are the terms of those service agreements? And can you get yourself into a position to negotiate either a better quality of service? Can you negotiate better rates? So for example, a customs broker typically will charge you £36 per customs entry. Can you negotiate down? Now, one of the ways that clients normally find, a simple quick fix that is to cut the number of service providers. I have clients that actually, when they assess how many customs brokers do they currently engage in the UK, it could be 10, 20, 30, or sometimes even more than that, because they're relying on their customers to appoint a customs broker who still acts actually on their behalf. So that's a really quick win, in my view, and something that somebody could easily do from home. Have a look at your customs data, apply for that from HMRC, and have a look through it. Start doing some simple analytics. Where can we make savings? I think the next step would be to look at, what is your escalation policy around customs and trade disputes, or what happens when your goods get stopped at the border? Because this is going to become an increasing problem for businesses that trade with the EU, because obviously there's a 2-border crossing there. There's an export from the UK and a subsequent import into the EU, or vice versa. So how are you going to deal with potential investigations by the customs authorities? Who internally is responsible for picking up those queries? If a customs officer walks onto your premises and asks to see documentation, how are you going to handle that? And how are you going to communicate that plan effectively across the organisation? So historically, I've done a lot of work with businesses, writing a policy, and then ensuring that the training is in place so that everybody within the business knows their role in the event of an investigation or goods being stopped at the border. And I think, and in terms of how long would that take for somebody to draft, I think, depending on the size of the business and perhaps the number of sites you cover, but I think you could easily do that within 2 to 4 weeks. That to me is a quick win. Something, a slightly bigger project, but again, something that somebody within your legal team could easily take an initial view on, is in a post-Brexit trading world, what trade facilitation measures are there available that could help your business save money, improve cash flow. That's going to become perhaps really key for businesses that, particularly if we have, a short recession in the UK this year, is how can we protect our cash? How do we ensure that our landed costs are as low as possible when we are importing or exporting around the world? Now, to get an authorization for a customs bonded warehouse, which would suspend or delay the payment of duty, or, for example, to operate a relief that would give you duty refunds on manufacturing raw materials that you've bought from outside the EU, those authorizations need to be cleared through HMRC. And again, the time process for that, particularly in view that HMRC are going to be resource tight at the moment, I would allow a 6 to 12 months time frame. So that to me again is a longer term project to be easily tackled by the legal team, because you have that holistic view of the business. You can see where goods are moving to and from, or at least you know within your organization who do you need to go and ask, get that data, get your first step of the project, so the feasibility study started.
Yeah, and also, of course, anything that goes with liquidity right now is vitally important. And so it's never thing for a lawyer to be seen to be supporting liquidity of a business.
Absolutely, and we can obviously help businesses even take a very, very initial first view of what is available to you and what would that application look like, and what would you need to do to position yourself to be successful in obtaining that authorization. The fourth item I had on my list was authorized economic operator, the so-called trusted trader. I know you're a fan of this, Bernardine, so we've been talking about this a lot and how we can support our clients in obtaining this status. So,
and also, I find it extraordinary how, compared to Germany, how little take-up there is still in the United Kingdom. It's such a facilitative thing. I'm just so surprised that business has not adopted it more, especially given how long it takes to get. Anyway, over to you, Ursula.
No, and it's an interesting point. So I spoke with HMRC a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about why has the number of authorizations been so low in the UK? Well, obviously the number of businesses applying has picked up, but something that HMRC have been very cautious about is awarding the status where it's not merited. So quite often they're receiving applications, and the level of information that's required, or the level of documentation you need to present to demonstrate that you meet this trusted trader status is not there. So HMRC, rather than reject the application, are telling businesses to go back, have another look, and then come back to us in 3 to 4 months' time. Because once HMRC formally reject your application, you're actually blocked from applying for another 12 months. So it's actually critical that businesses that think they want this status make sure that the application is high quality from the get-go. And I think we've both looked through the negotiating guidelines, and authorized economic operator is there from both sides.
Yeah,
both the EU and the UK are saying this status is a way for us to recognise businesses on both sides of the border, that we can essentially say they are compliant, they operate a secure supply chain. So let's direct resource into looking at those businesses that do not meet this particular criteria.
I think there's probably naivety with some businesses. I think, oh yes, we can apply for that. It's a form-filling exercise. As you know, Ush, it's not a form-filling exercise. You have to talk a little bit about what people need to do to make sure that they can meet that criteria.
So it's saying there's sort of five sort of pieces to this. There's, on the one hand, you have 2 modules that look at your physical safety and security. So do you have locks on your gates? Do you have restricted access to the goods that you store in your warehouse, for example? And then there's 3 other modules which really look at customs compliance. So do you operate in a customs compliant environment? Do you ensure that your people have training? Do you have somebody responsible for customs? Do you ensure that you give your freight forwarder proper instruction? Now, it's all very well to tick the box, yes, but you need to demonstrate that. So, you know, coming back to this example of, do you instruct your freight forwarder to complete the customs declarations accurately on your behalf? Or do you have a written policy that you share with your freight forwarder? Do you routinely go back and check on their work and make sure that what they have done is accurate and complete? Because, you know, coming back to that first point I made about engaging with your service providers, it's very important to remember that your customs agent is not responsible for the data that they file on your behalf.
Yes.
If they get it wrong, or you've told them to do something incorrectly, it's on you. HMRC will come and look to recover that underpaid duty from you, and then we've now seen it in a number of countries working with, levy penalties as well.
Yes, yeah. HMRC seem to be more aggressive at the moment, don't they? At least they were pre-COVID anyway.
Yeah, well, this again was something that's come out from an audit that was undertaken by the European Commission on customs compliance, how it's being regulated across customs authorities from different EU member states. And the UK has been picked up, particularly on tariff classification, which is why we're seeing, well, certainly since January this year, we've seen an increasing focus by the customs authorities on tariff classification. They've been picked up on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what is the fifth point then?
So the fifth and final point is something that you're very familiar with as well, sanctions. So all the, you know, our understanding, both you and I, is that once we leave the European Union, so we leave that sanctions regime of the EU, the UK will have an independent sanctions policy. Of course, it will still fit within the international agreements on sanctions, but we expect that the UK will move closer to a US-style regime and will be much quicker to react to developing political situations overseas, and will increase the number of, you know, will look to fine and impose penalties on businesses that do not comply.
Yeah, possibly criminal sanctions as well. Yeah, and we expect that's going to be quite a sea change, because to date people are really worried about US sanctions, rather than EU sanctions imposed by the individual member states. And we envisage that the UK is going to be moving more towards the US style of sanctions. So all of that to come.
And so what we're looking at saying to businesses, and particular legal teams, is test the robustness of your sanctions policy now, because if that is not watertight now, then once we leave the EU and we adopt our own sanctions policy, it's only going to become more difficult to improve your sanctions processes and to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing from the get-go.
Yeah, and also an escalation policy as well, because mistakes happen. And what it needs to do is have a policy whereby it shoots very quickly up towards the legal team, who are then able to do something about it.
And that includes, of course, like a process for voluntary disclosure as well, which again is sort of a topic in its own right.
Yes, all of this to come.
So that was it's actually just started raining, so I can.
And guess what? The sun's out here. The sun is shining in Warwick. I might go and feed the ducks now. Thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. And we would be pleased to pick up any questions that you may have after you've watched this recording, and we invite you to direct those through the team and through the link that I'm sure you'll see below the recording. So have a lovely afternoon, and we wish you and your families all the very best over the coming weeks. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.